All right, Sam, good to see you again. Thank you
Thank
for
you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. Last time since we spoke, I think there was a lot of interest in your book and also the points you've raised in the dialogue. And I'm very grateful we have a chance to follow up and have a bit more discussion around education, around almost the system view of education and how we both as individuals or as educators should reflect what we're doing in education in this bigger context. So really appreciate that. I think this time we'll start with one topic you and I discussed on is the whole idea of using digital or technology in education. Because when I was in Finland myself in 2018, I realized I was actually quite impressed by the widespread of they call it ICT curriculum. I remember Finland, they told me since the second grade, they have a phone. So they can use the phone to get on the bus and all that. And now with a ChatGPT, and there's a lot more awareness and discussion with technology. So I wonder, you being in Finland and also, of course, watching the spread of ICT, a spread of that in schools. I wonder what's people's view now? Like, do people still think it's a great thing, or there's some questions or doubts?
There are a lot of doubts now. And a lot of teachers, administrators are worried that students aren't reading books anymore. And they're glued to their phones. In fact, there's a citizens initiative right now to collect 50,000 signatures, which is the necessary number for Parliament to debate the termination of access to phones in schools. So there's a big campaign now to keep phones out of schools. Teachers may be able to effectively keep students from using phones in class, but then between classes in the hallway or outside, they're all glued to their phones. I've been spending a lot of time in schools here in Finland, and that's exactly what I observed just a couple of weeks ago when I guest taught a couple of classes on Finnish versus US social contracts in a city called Raisio. And the teacher, it was 2 classes, and the teacher had all the students put their phones away during class, but between classes, and there was a 15-minute break between classes, all the students were in their hallways glued to their phones. So it's a big problem here. And I'm a Surgeon General, by the way, 3 weeks ago in the United States issued a report on the very serious mental health ramifications of overuse of social media, and that we really have to restrict how much children are using social media. In my opinion, in this light, there should be 6 hours a day when students are in school, when they don't have access to phones, smartphones, and we really restrict the use of iPads, Chromebooks, tablets. You need to put your blinders on to understand difficult texts. If it's Shakespeare, if it's calculus, you can't be looking to your left all the time or right at your phone or a computer. You really have to block out the world. And this is just a cognitive reality. And I think educators are coming to terms with that. I think in terms of why ed tech became so popular, we just have to follow the money. Google, Microsoft, Apple, they make a lot of money from ed tech. And they have weekend retreats for school administrators and teachers with steak dinners and tennis and golf and a few seminars, and they give away technology and software, and they try to make teachers and administrators brand ambassadors and get inside the schools. I think we have to follow the money. Good schools don't need this.
Well, this is, yeah, this might be surprising to lots of the audience, because EdTech seems to be a big trend now. And almost schools are competing to be ahead of other schools in terms of technology, both software and hardware. And I remember when I visited schools in New York, they have those called Apple schools. It means like when you have enough certain number of Apple devices, they get, I guess, some certification. And schools are very proud of it, and they use it in their marketing materials, saying that like how cutting edge it is. And frankly, I mean, Japan now, Japan is the same. There is a, Japan in general is more technology heavy already, like, savvy already. And then now there is also a lot of schools, and I think Ministry of Education has this project called Giga Projects. Basically, the goal is to give every student an iPad. And this is actually very new. So I think maybe they will be surprised or shocked to see like Finland is actually thinking the other way now, or at least like scholars like yourself are thinking another way. Other like discussions in the broader like policymaker group on this issue?
Well, there is pushback here against EdTech. I don't think it's sufficiently wide yet. EdTech is very much part of curricula here in Finland. But I know a lot of teachers whom I've interviewed who feel that EdTech has gone too far. Certainly there's a place for EdTech. Aristotle long ago said that every virtue in the extreme becomes a vice. Okay, and a good thing, too much of a good thing, can be quite bad. And EdTech can obviously be a very useful tool, but it has to be understood that it's got its limitations. And we can obviously use it for doing data analysis in a way that we never could do data analysis before. We can use it for very interesting presentations in PowerPoint that we couldn't do before, with lots of images and graphs and tables. But we have to be very careful about overusing it, because if we do overuse it, and we are overusing it, we're going to preclude the opportunity to read and really sink our minds deeply into problems, whether they're scientific or mathematical. So we really have to preserve that sacred space for concentration.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, because I remember reading this book called Triple Focus, or saying that, in terms of for a person to be successful, or for a system to be successful, there's a focus on self, and focus on others, and focus on the world. And then, but everything starts with this focus on self, or this attention, ability to have, to be focused and have attention is probably the foundation for all learning. I think we kind of all understand it, but when you say that, it's true, because, when with smartphones and all the tools, they tend to be designed to be fragmented, and then to change a lot, and then to have sort of blocks of time, which seem to be structured, but actually it blocks the actual attention, or the nature of how attention being formed or focused in need space to develop.
Right. And in terms of this triple focus, you're other directed. You're not inner directed. David Riesman, a great sociologist, wrote a profound book in 1950 called The Lonely Crowd. And he was very worried about this development of a predominant personality type, the other directed, always looking to the left and right to fit in, instead of looking inside to know who you are. To go back to ancient Greece before Aristotle, go back to Aristotle's teacher's teacher, Plato's teacher, Socrates, his most important lesson he articulated was know thyself. And you have to know yourself. It's very hard to know yourself when you're always looking at what other people are thinking. And technology is so other-driven, other-directed. And you don't have, not only do you not have the time alone to really read a poem or break down a mathematical puzzle. But you're moreover distracted by what other people are doing and thinking all the time. So you're worried about their perception of you. And this has real cognitive consequences for personal growth.
Mhm. Well said. Yeah, exactly. I think instead of know thyself, we're looking at others. We're doing the opposite. But that's so true. I think that probably leads to the to another topic that, like actually your book. Again, this is Sam's book. I have the English version called Education and the Commercial Mindset. And then there's a Chinese version of it too being published. And then everybody in China can actually get a copy of it. But in the beginning, the prologue already mentioned this effect, this thing called stadium effect, which is, it's slightly different from the digital, because digital is, as one person, you can start, even when you're alone, you start to look at left and right because you're, put in such a digital environment. But let's say the stadium effect, I think for most, in Chinese called 剧场效应, we're probably not many of us actually familiar with it. It's also talking about in education, when you make choices, lots of our input is not based on something inside. It's not like based on your motives, your passion, your goal, your learning journey. Rather, it's very much based on what else, or what my neighbor is doing, or my classmates is doing, what my, like friends, family is doing. But once you start doing that, it actually introduces a lot of unhealthy competition into the system. Can you elaborate a bit on that, especially how this book addressed that as well?
Well, yeah, thank you for this opportunity to talk about this topic. It's a favorite topic of mine. The stadium effect is a pretty obscure term in economics, but I think it's a powerful one. If you're watching a basketball game or a football match, and somebody and people in the first row stand up to see a big play, in a heartbeat, everybody in the arena is standing up. And the way that applies to education policy is, if a country focuses on test scores, or a school district focuses on test scores in two particular subjects, for example, reading and math, as was the case in the United States, as has been the case in the United States, then you pit principal against principal, because the principals are graded, they're ranked according to the math and reading scores of their students. So they focus just on math and reading, and they cut out time for science and history. Math is the language of science. There are very few people who can appreciate math without science. History is really the context for so much literature. So if you're not teaching much history, it's very difficult to appreciate the literature. So you have these very perverse consequences with this type of focus on testing. And of course, you're cutting out time for physical education, which is basic. We'll go back to ancient times, again, not as far as Aristotle and Socrates, but Juvenal, the great Roman satirist, famously said, mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body. Actually, the sneaker company ASICS, a variation on that, it's animus sanctum in corpore sano, a sound spirit in a animus sanctus in corpore sano, a sound spirit in a sound body. So the sneaker ASICS is all about that. If schools are cutting out physical education, and they have been, or recess, then you don't have a sound mind, a sound body. You can't focus, you can't read, you can't do math if you don't take a break and take in some fresh air. So the stadium effect in education, in terms of how schools operate on a daily basis, is patent, it's obvious. And then in terms of tutoring, and this is a big problem around the world. I know in Japan and China in particular, where students are spending almost as much time outside of school in these tutoring programs, and their parents are spending a lot of money on these tutoring programs. You have another illustration of the stadium effect. And even in Finland, there's concern about the stadium effect, where you have parents paying a good deal of money to help their children prepare for what are called the matriculation exams. That's the Finnish version of the baccalaureate to get into university. And the tutoring can be expensive and time consuming. But if you don't pay for that for your child, okay, and everybody else is doing it, well, just like the person who doesn't stand up in the arena, the stadium, to see the play, they won't be able to see that big play on the basketball court or the football field. Likewise, your child is not going to get into university. So it's a contagious problem, or you can call it a contagion problem. And the only way to combat that, it appears, is through some form of regulation, or some kind of alteration of cultural consciousness, which is a very difficult thing to achieve.
Yeah, no, I agree. So interesting, because when I see this issue in urban Japan, and when I was talking about this issue with policymakers and saying, like, why there isn't more regulation, and their argument was that those companies or tutoring companies are too powerful. They have too much money, and also they have too much marketing, and then they change parents' mind, and then parents are becoming advocates for them. So it feels like they don't have enough support in the democracy to push for it. And then they almost use the sense of having a democracy as a reason why you can't have regulation. But I actually disagree, because I'll draw a bit of my own example from another sector, which is breastfeeding. Yeah, because in my previous life, when I was working in public health, it's a similar issue. So if back then, I remember, if you look at the data in China used to, I forgot which year, I think now is lower, but used to account for about 15% of the world's birth cohort. But China contribute to 33% of the world's formula consumption, okay, baby formula. So it means that there's not much, at least below average breastfeeding, okay? And then from a public health point of view, that's not good, because there's plenty of data research to show that, you at least for the first 6 months, as much as possible, you should do pure all breastfeeding. And that's exactly the reason, because they were saying, okay, because there's money, because those companies would come to the hospitals or with newborns and give pamphlets to newborn mothers, to nurses. And I think there's probably certain financial incentives for nurses and hospitals as well. And that's what you see. So one of the things people are trying to push is exactly that, is regulation, because even in democracy or capitalized market or capitalism market, actually there's very stringent regulation, what kind of promotion you can do, starting with at what age. So it's not, I don't think market economy or democracy should be an excuse for not doing it. And then formula is a glaring example of why those companies come to China, because they're precisely because of holes in regulation there. Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's similar, but it does take, I guess it does take leadership or stamina to do it. I would say it's true, because I think I can imagine as a, when all the parents you talk to seem to be, excited about spending money there. It seems to become a social pressure, but it's not, right? How do you see it? I wonder if that kind of thing or kind of barrier existed in countries like Finland as well. Like how, when you try to push for certain regulation top down, when the public opinion is not there, although, we know this is good for you, but, everybody look at a very micro environment. I think I just want to get a stool to stand higher in the stadium. How should the system kind of, engage with it and push for a potential change?
Well, another way to push for that potential change is to take, rather than the micro approach, the macro approach, and try to figure out why there's so much pressure in the first place. for students to go to the best universities. Why is there such competition? And that exposes a problem, I think, with the culture and with the social contract. If you have wage compression, if you have a good social contract, so there isn't real concern about economic precarity, then there shouldn't be so much pressure for students to go to a top university. And there shouldn't be such a feeling of hierarchical competition. You should be okay doing something else. So that really reflects a cultural problem. I think we talked a little bit before about vocational education. Vocational education has a much bigger footprint here in Finland than, for example, in the United States. And that makes sense, because if you get a diploma in auto maintenance or cosmetology or culinary arts in Finland, you're going to have maternity, paternity leave, generous maternity, paternity leave. You're going to have very subsidized daycare. You're going to have 4 to 6 weeks paid vacation. You're going to have good health care. You're going to participate in a decent pension plan. So when you get older, you don't have to worry about funding for your retirement. You're going to have a decent elementary school in your neighborhood. If your daughter or son decides to go to university, it's going to be free. Not one of those 7 things is true in the United States. If you get a diploma in auto maintenance or cosmetology or culinary arts, you're going to be in a very tough situation. So that explains why that helps to explain why there's so much more pressure in the United States to get into a top university. In Finland, there's pressure. I mean, certainly lots of people want to go to the best universities, including the one where I am now as a visiting professor at the University of Turku, but it's not the same thing, because you are going to be okay if you study auto maintenance and get a job as a garage mechanic. You're not going to have to worry about putting a good meal on the table every day and having health insurance and daycare and everything else. So a lot of this, in terms of the macro, is about the social contract. But that takes a lot of what I'd call magnanimity, caring for other people. And you need a society that cares about other people so that you can have such decent benefits and wage compression.
Yeah. Indeed, I agree, because I often say that too. I think, problems in education cannot be solved by education alone, because education is a place where issues in the society surface. Because many of the structural issues, exactly as you said, because why people are so competitive is because the rewards or the punishment on the opposite side of different college entrance results is too significant, to ignore, or because the choice makes a big difference, as you said. Maybe if you really graduated from a auto maintenance major versus if you go to I don't know, law school, maybe law school, not just like, let's say if you studied some other science major, the trajectory of your lifelong income, or that's on the upside, or on the downside, the level of social security or social network you have, when it differs so much, then of course it will transfer the anxiety down the stream when you start to apply for college. I agree. I think as I share with you, I'm in Japan now. One of the surprise things I found is that how much competition and pressure is here in a frankly rapidly aging society with fewer and fewer kids and young people. It's exactly that, because the end point or the career track hasn't changed. So it basically, when people can do the calculation, right? If I want there, they have to do this. You want to come here, I'm going to do this. So one of the things I realized, something I've been sharing recently, is that it became a system that constrains or limits the entrance. So the entrance of certain university then from there, it's the entrance of certain college, high school, and entrance of certain middle school, entrance of certain, even all the way down to preschool. But that's almost the opposite of a good education system. The good education system should have a pretty wide entrance, but have a tight exit, right? So everybody should have certain chance, but depends on how hard you work, or how aligned things are with your passion. The constraint should be on the exit rather than be on the entrance. So I think right now the problem I see, at least in Japan, is the flip. So once you get in, the life is guaranteed. So entrance becomes critical. It doesn't matter, like once you go to a certain university, it almost doesn't matter how well you did in the university, because even just that certificate alone can guarantee you into certain job opportunities. So that's how I felt. It's the system that's on the system issue seems to be the flip of what a healthy system should be.
Right. I think the bigger picture does call for a different conception, a different conception of society, where the consequences of your education aren't so severe. And in a warmer, more generous society that operates like a big family, then the baker and the garage mechanic and the hairdresser don't have to worry. They shouldn't have to worry. They're performing valuable services in our lives, and they shouldn't be under such pressure. But a callous community, a callous society, puts terrible pressure on people who have diplomas in those fields. So that's the big picture, and I think we can't ignore that big picture. In terms of regulation, though, there is a lot that we can do in terms of regulation. The fact of the matter is, in sports, we have rules against performance enhancement drugs or steroids of some variation. Tutoring is a form of a steroid.
I love that analogy. You're right. It's an expensive one. You have to pay for it too.
It's expensive. It's a form of a performance enhancement drug. And the testing companies have said that these are preparation proof exams. That's been proven not to be true. In the United States, we've seen real effects with test prep companies like Princeton Review and Stanley Kaplan, and these small boutique tutoring firms that charge crazy sums. $500, $600, $700 an hour, okay, for name brand tutors, even $1,000 on the Upper East Side of Manhattan for the best tutors. Those are steroids. That's cheating. Yeah. And if there's a way to regulate it, there should be a way to regulate. One way to regulate it, actually, is to change the tests. So we were talking about PISA before. I think PISA has become a circus. We have countries that have redesigned their curricula to prepare students for PISA, because it always makes the front page of the newspapers around the world, who's on top. And countries are very self-conscious about this. That is, the government leaders are very self-conscious about this. The only way to make PISA, I think, relevant anymore is to scramble the subjects, so countries can't even know what's going to be tested. Now, that's a little difficult. How do you come up with a test in history, for example, that is fairly assessed across different cultures? I think there's a way to do it, okay? You do have experts in testing who could, I think, come up with metrics that would be applicable across countries. But if you just did, say, 2 subjects instead of 3, and you had a total of, say, 8 subjects that could be chosen from each administration, that is, every 3 years, then you couldn't prepare students for the exams. All right. You could have a test in aesthetics. You could have a test in social and emotional learning. You could have a whole bunch of different subjects. And I think that's probably another way to regulate, is to scramble the subjects. As far as stopping the tutoring itself, I think it goes underground. You'll have a black market because parents will always try to find a way to give their children that advantage. That's a very difficult thing to do. But if you scramble the subjects, then it's very difficult for the tutors to do their jobs. The other thing I think we should bear in mind too, in terms of the macro, is the culture of narcissism. An historian named Christopher Lasch wrote a book with that title a couple of generations ago. And as we become more separated from each other, we become much more focused on ourselves and self-interest. So we can still be other directed in terms of looking to our left and right, in terms of where we fit in. Yeah. But it's all about who we are with respect to others. And this kind of narcissism does, I think, have a lot to do with education practice, in that we're focused on climbing this ladder, going to the best university, and getting the best jobs. There's a documentary that came out several years ago in the United States called The Race to Nowhere. And it's about students who are always trying to excel and win one prize after another, but they're empty in the end. Right. So we have a lot to think about culturally, but also in terms of regulation. And I think there are ways to stop this doping. And that's essentially what we have. We have doping going on with the testing.
Yeah. And then the scary thing is the doping, not only at a personal level, at a team level, it's at a national level.
Yes. Yeah. You have countries doping. Exactly. There's a sociologist named Donald Campbell, who in 1974 in a lecture at Dartmouth College said that anytime a metric is used for social policy making purposes, it will be subject to corruption pressures. Anytime a metric is used for social policy making purposes, it will be subject to corruption pressures. PISA has been corrupted. The first three administrations, I think, meant something. I don't think they mean much anymore, because you really do have whole countries focused on math, reading, and science. So the exams don't mean what they used to mean. And Japan, where you are now, is unfortunately a glaring example of that. The reading score on for PISA in 2006 was a 498. I heard from somebody with direct knowledge of what was taking place in Tokyo at that time, that the Minister of Education was furious upon getting the results in 2007. The results come a year later, because it showed that Japanese students were at the mean, in the middle of the pack, and said we have to redevise the curriculum in Japan so students do better on these exams. Well, 2 administrations later, in 2012, the mean score for reading in Japan was a 538. It jumped 40 points. Now, that's equivalent to more than a year of learning. They say that 35 points on PISA, equates a year of learning. The way they do that is they give the same exam to a cohort of students who are a year older, and they, on average, do 35 points better. The probability that Japanese students were better by a year, more than a year, 6 years later, is nil. That's not possible. Your younger sister is not a year smarter, and you're in 6 years later. That only happens if you teach the test. So this proves Campbell's law. And as you said, it's doping on a national level. The countries have succumbed to this pressure in the name of national vanity, national pride. That's absurd. And it means educational malpractice. because those students who are only really focused on those 3 subjects, they're not getting a broad curriculum. They're not getting a broad education, which is necessary to be a complete person and a complete citizen.
Yeah, no, indeed. I think it's, as you say, it's like this looking left and right, not looking inward, looking yourself. It applies both at an individual level and at a country level, right? And then when you quote the name of the book and Race to Nowhere, the same thing. It's you can be a country race to nowhere. Like, you're racing towards that to be better than Finland. Okay, yes, you are. You got it. Okay, then.
Then what?
Right, then what? Then you're top of the world and you can sleep, you don't have to learn anymore. Yeah, it's just so funny if you think about like how human beings like behave and how what drives our behavior. It's very absurd.
But you can imagine the conversations in cabinet meetings that if we're not on the front pages as having top students, then corporations are not going to locate here. They're not going to build research and development centers in our country. They have to know that we have cutting edge human capital. And if we don't have top human capital, then we're not going to attract foreign investment. And we need foreign investment, and we need research and development centers here. So this is the kind of conversation you can easily imagine taking place at cabinet meetings. Oh no, on the front page of newspapers around the world, Japan's in the middle. What are we going to do?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a collective ethos or collective inertia as well, right? It's just like that's so true to everything. I mean, similar this, you can imagine similar discussion happening in the family behind, in the living room or in the family room, the same thing, right? Like, okay, you get a B. Okay, you're not going nowhere in your life. Okay, let's get a tutor.
A friend of mine long ago, his parents expected him to go to Harvard. He didn't get in. He settled. He went to Dartmouth, which I just mentioned, is where Donald Campbell gave that lecture in 1974. That's an excellent college. Yeah. And in Judaism, there's a term Kaddish. It's that's the mourner's prayer, but Shiva is a term, Hebrew term for sitting with your friends and relatives for a week after the death of a loved one. And so if somebody in your family dies, then for a week, everybody gathers at the home to say the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, and have a nice meal and reflect on the person. And this friend of mine who didn't get into Harvard, he said his family was ready to sit Shiva. Okay, to sit Shiva was to mourn the death of this boy at age 17, that they were ready to sit Shiva because he didn't get into Harvard. And he went to Dartmouth and he had a perfectly good career, but the dark cloud hanging over him because he didn't get into Harvard was so overwhelming. The poor guy had such terrible feelings of guilt, but it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. No, it's so funny because when I, talk about other issues, to my community, we often talk about the concept of what drives our behavior, and oftentimes it's fear. Right, it's fear at a certain level. Of course, it can be packaged at different things. Sometimes it can be packaged as pride. No, it's not pride. It's fear. It's fear of not having pride, or it's fear of missing out, or fear of not looking glamorous, or basically it's fear. And this fear is very deep down, but it manifests itself at a personal level, at a family level, at a community, at a system, at a country. And education is a place where this exhibition is the most concentrated, because education is about children, or it's about the future, right? So like all this and like the concept of future, concept of child, the concept of unlimited possibility, and that together is almost it's basically doping on crack. It's like triple doping.
Right.
Yeah, so like we have
fear.
Yeah. But we have to create this awareness, because otherwise we're not running our life, or we're not running our education system. It's the fear running it. It's the fear running the system.
Well, I think you're getting to the heart of the problem. Fear is built on fear of being overlooked. Plato, to go back to ancient Greece, and Alfred North Whitehead, the British philosopher, said that all philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. So I'll go back to Plato. And Plato talked about a concept called thumos, mattering. And what we're really fearing is that we don't matter. What Plato said is, if your sense of mattering is not respected, you feel anger. If you don't live up to your sense of mattering, you feel despair, depressed. If you do live up to your sense of mattering, then you feel satisfied. You feel good. Okay, you feel good if you live up to your sense of mattering. And why is it that people or societies don't feel like they matter? That's a big, big question. And it could be very much a symptom of modernity, that in modernity, you don't have much family, you don't have much communal sense of belonging. And so everything is defined by success. Durkheim in 1897 wrote a famous book on suicide. And what he observed with this growing incidence of suicide, this is 1897, so that's 126 years ago. And what Emil Durkheim observed was that with industrialization, there wasn't as much family time. With the decline of religion, there wasn't as much focus on the community and on one's spiritual health. And consequently, you had to find satisfaction through success, through achievement. But how many of us can win a gold medal? Only a few. So there's this despair. And the ultimate expression of despair is suicide. Okay. So for Durkheim, the answer is find meaning through friendships and through family relationships and through a spiritual life that makes you feel like, to get back to Plato, that you matter, and that it's not all about a race. It's not all about winning that gold medal. But if you don't have a family context, if you don't have a communal context, if you don't have some kind of spiritual context, then everything's going to be about achievement. But you can never achieve enough, because there's always going to be somebody better, almost always.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very profound. I'm glad we came to this point in this discussion. It's very true, because I was listening to this online seminar talking about college students' well-being I think this is held in Boston. So there's MIT, Harvard, and there's also a college professor from Yale. And then even for the point you mentioned about matter, like if the way I feel I matter is through success, then they're asking those students who got admitted into Harvard, like, contrary to your friend, they actually got admitted into Harvard, into MIT, into Yale. So they basically asked them, like, were you happy, when you get this letter of admission? And so, of course, we're like ecstatic, right? So we're very happy. And they're asking, how long did that last? They're saying, okay, about a split second. And that's it. Because then suddenly there's this wave of, thoughts like coming again. Exactly what you said. That's the next race. Well, now I'm into Harvard. Okay, then I look around, all this, another 1,000 kids who are in Harvard. Then suddenly I'm overwhelmed again. So even if you have achieved success, like become one of, thousands who got into Harvard, whatever this, denominator is, if your sense of mattering is based on that achievement, that's very short-lived. And then it's basically a transient. It's like a split second. So like when they quoted that data, I found so interesting. Like, it's true, right? So like even if you didn't get in, you would think, okay, I would have been much happier if I did. Yeah, maybe you were, but only for a split second.
So because once you're at Harvard, you're competing with everybody else for more distinction.
Right.
And
exactly.
you want to get to a top law school if you're interested in law. And then if you make it to a top law school, you need to make the law review. And if you make law review, need to get a Supreme Court clerkship, okay, on and on and on. And it doesn't stop. But I think you have to ask yourself, okay, so who's truly fulfilled and happy? And that's where you see, because you can see a lot of people who achieve all these things, but they may not be in shape physically. Okay, staying in shape physically, that takes work, but it's going to lead to a lot of happiness. Okay, and there are a lot of people who achieve great things, but at the cost of their physical and mental health. If you don't take out some time to go for a run or go swimming, okay, do something. You need to do something every day. Okay, here in Finland, I've been playing hockey early in the morning with a group of guys, okay, during the winter months. It's 6:15 to 7:15, okay? It's a range of guys, police officers, firefighters, plumbers, engineers, medical school student, and it's the healthiest thing. Early in the morning, and it doesn't matter what you do. Nobody talks about their work, okay? It doesn't matter if somebody's making a lot of money and somebody isn't. You're just there, you're playing hockey, and you're having a good time, you're staying in shape. And these people are in their 40s, 50s. I think we even have a couple of guys in their 60s. They're in great shape, okay? And they're consequently mentally happy because of that physical activity. And at what cost, all of this achievement? So you want to have these group of friends. So it's not just an athletic activity, it's a group activity, which is very important for your mental health. And then you have to have friendships, and you should have some kind of community activity, and some semblance of spiritual life. You don't have to believe in any kind of deity, but some kind of worldview that gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning. All of these things are obscured by this race to achieve and distinguish oneself.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So I really want to echo what you say in terms of the sense of community and building relationships. I think in the same, and the spiritual life, of course, as well. And then because in the same seminar when I mentioned, they were talking, they have actually a very interesting set of data. They were looking at, kids who go to church, right? It doesn't have to be but you're saying, like, even it doesn't matter what kind of church you go to, or what kind of, as long as there's a regular thing you go to as a group. So it doesn't matter, like, you don't what you believe, because most of the kids probably don't understand what the Sunday school is teaching anyway. But the fact that you actually go regularly, have a group, has a much higher level of happiness and mental health index compared to others. That's very eye-opening. And that was also very interesting how, we kind of intuitively, when we started E2 school, is similar. I said in my speech, in my books, and talked about, I said the most important thing in education are the things that's invisible. Because it's very easy to see your test score. It's very visible, right? Or it's very easy to see your teacher's resume. That's the resume, because that's in lots of schools use that to attract students. Okay, look at our teachers, got this degree from here. This is our test score, or there's other visible things, like the size of your building, like how fancy your furniture is. Lots of parents, when they look at schools, those are the things they look at. They look at, okay, your building, your infrastructure. And I was like, for sure. I mean, that's fine. That's good. But actually, most important things are the invisible ones. So what are the invisible ones? Precisely the things you talked about, like what's the relationship between people or among people there? Like how does kids interact with the kids? How does kids interact with adults? How does adult interact with adults, right? How does parents interact with teachers? So like those are the things we should be aware or open our eyes to, because that's, as you exactly said, that's the sense of community and relationship. And that's actually very fundamental to a child growth and well-being. The analogy I use is, this is as if you and I are farming, of course we want our tree or our plant or bush to grow high. But in order to do it, you don't go there and measure the bush every day. You don't go test the bush every day. What you do is you make sure there's, good fertilizer in the soil, there's good water, there's enough sunshine. And those are the things you do, as you said, right? This is like, the reach to the sun is the spiritual health. the root in the ground is your community, is your sense of self-worth and being built through a connection with other people. But those are the things, like that's what most education do wrong. I think most education, like the farmers go measure the plant every day.
Well, we have a saying in America among farmers that you don't fatten a pig by weighing it more often.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's essentially, but that's what we've been trying to do with our education policy. We've been trying to smarten, so to speak, our students by testing them more frequently. In fact, in my book, I talk about Chris Whittle, whom you mentioned before, who said that you should.
First chapter of the book.
Yeah. Well, actually, chapters 1 through 7 are about Chris Whittle. Okay. It's about the rise and fall of his company. And Whittle believed that you should be able to know the reading and math proficiency of your child with the same exactitude as you know where your Federal Express package is in transit. Just as you know that package just left, the store or wherever, you should be able to follow it, and you should be able to have the same exact knowledge of where your child is in math and reading. That's ridiculous, because there's I mean, we know this from Heisenberg, the physicist. You can't get both the location of a particle and its velocity. You get one or the other. Okay. And it's the Heisenberg principle, is that you're going to disturb one if trying to get the other. There are these corruption consequences of over-observation. But these outside activities, external from educational achievement, are so fundamental. I think they're the fundamental lesson from Durkheim's very bleak book on suicide. They're basic to Robert Putnam's famous book, Bowling Alone. Robert Putnam's in this book 20 some years ago, a generation ago, observed that in his state of Ohio, there's still the same number of people who bowl today as when he was growing up. But a long time ago, they bowled in leagues. And when you bowl in leagues, you have a community, and you have pizza, and you get to know each other from different generations. And that's very fundamental to a healthy society. But when you get atomized and broken up and divided, and you're just bowling alone with a friend instead of in a league, you don't really get that opportunity to evolve as a more complete human being.
That's so true. And that really speaks to my experience here in Japan as well. It's very interesting, because I think used to be, I guess if you look at ancient, most of Asia society is very much community based. There's villages, and then that's kind of the fundamental of the social fabric of East Asia societies. But now with modernization, it become nuclear family, right? So it became mama, papa and kids. In China, probably still a bit better. There's still certain tradition of having grandparents living with you, but it almost being viewed as the outdated, not more than enough family. And now in Japan, it's even another step forward is one person. If you go to a supermarket here to buy grocery, you actually have an option of buying half a broccoli. And it's actually cut in half, because it's just, that's just enough for one person. So most of the display of the products are, food are actually for one person. So you just realize how many people are there to eat alone. And also if you go to restaurants, I mean, that's part of probably social norm, but restaurants most of them are structured so that there is this cubics of one person eating. But on the other hand, that's so interesting. There was this barbecue place, next to it. I look at the hours. The hours is from 11:30 a.m. till 4 a.m. So you will see a group of people showing up at midnight, and social together. So but from all the standard or all the health science, we know that's not healthy. You don't eat at midnight a bunch of meat barbecued and all that. But that's where people go social. So you almost see if you suppress certain things, it does come out somehow. In this case, it's probably coming from this 4 a.m. restaurant, or in other places, it come out in a form of illness, right? In the form of mental health breakdown, in form of depression. So because all this kind of modern arrangements are actually suppressing very basic human needs. We kind of pride on it, and we not only pride on it, we innovate on it. Yeah, we have technology set up for it, but those are actually all very fundamental. I think that kind of it's so interesting you're talking about it, because when I walk by that street every day to go to Subway, and then there are two things I see, right? One is those kind of restaurants with the cubics. I think with COVID make it even easier, because they're like basically physical dividers between like little seats, and you see that everywhere. And the other thing you see is all those advertisements for tutoring services, for after school tutoring. So like, and then that's like exactly like I was mad because every day in Japan is very safe. So kids actually walk from grade 1, kids walk to school themselves or take subway themselves. So I often think if I were a first grader student or a second grader or first or whatever, like, you know, when I walk by, what I see is like, is that, right? And then there's on the one side, people are eating alone. On the other hand side, there's all those tutoring services I can go to get ahead of other kids. Like that actually condition you, right? Condition you very differently. And then you don't feel you're being changed as if, because those are just, you know, boards, you know, billboards on the streets or like restaurants you see. But it does. You actually condition.
Well, in terms of regulation, you could actually ban advertising of tutoring. You can't advertise, right? You can't, for example, we stopped in the United States television advertisements for cigarettes.
Yes.
Okay. You can't advertise cigarettes on television.
Yeah.
You could make a rule, no advertising for tutoring.
True.
And, you know, people say, oh, this is a terrible infringement on, you know, freedom of expression. Look, with freedom comes responsibility. And we don't have freedom to do everything we want. People need to be reminded of that. You can't turn your stereo up to 10 in your apartment if you have neighbors, okay? You have to keep it at a decent level. Likewise, tutoring companies should not be able to prey on the insecurities and anxieties of parents and students this way. It shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, I agree. No, indeed, it's everywhere. It's a part of visual and spiritual pollution.
It is.
Yeah, and we're allowing that to happen, and then to our kids, it's everywhere. It's all like, it's really, this is the one thing that's really shocked me, and that's why reading our book is it's very open, because you can almost supported me or supplied me with a tool or framework to see that, because the last time you talked about this whole idea of no exit from the Finland education system. And here, not only you have a lot of exit, you have a glaring sets of advertisement for this exit, just in case you could miss it. Like there's no way you can miss it. That's why you see the system like that. And exactly to your point, you know, it's like on steroids, because you feel better, or in the stadium you feel better, can see clearly. But actually, the outcome is that it's a terrible game. You don't enjoy the game, or you don't have good health. So everybody suffer from the system. But on the other hand, you feel like as if this is, you know, I have no other option, because everybody's standing on it. But on that, I want to discuss with maybe like, what's the way out? Because people would ask, okay, that's depressing. But if I'm in the system, if everybody's standing on the stool, what are my choices, right? But my argument is that that's indeed, you know, because people were saying like, okay, I agree with whatever Sam said, Yinuo said, but I'm waiting for the government to do something, right? Because if the regulators don't ban those advertisements, what can I do? I'm just a, you know, a normal person, a common person with no more resources than my neighbor. But my argument is always the opposite. I said, you know, like we actually always have choices. Yes, the choices might be limited, but like when we gave up our voice or our choices, that's when the system becomes overridingly powerful. But I wonder, what's your view? Like, you know, if you're asked by a Japanese mother, okay, I agree, I heard your point, but what can I do?
Well, there are petitions. I mean, here in Finland, for example, there are activists who are gathering signatures to ban phones in schools. Okay, they need 50,000 signatures to get this petition considered for a law in Parliament. They have a unicameral legislature here with 200 members of parliament, and then they can vote on this proposal that phones be banned. So there is something you can do. That's pretty difficult to expect of this parent in Japan. Okay, start a initiative to get signatures so that your parliament bans advertising of tutoring. So there's less pressure on us to put our child in this very unhealthy environment. I think all parents have to reconsider goals for their children and what family time is. It's a modern challenge, and what are our values? Can we carve out more time for family dinner, a healthy family dinner? If the kid is going to tutoring from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock with a bento box, there's no family dinner. Okay, and that means no family conversation. Are there opportunities also for intergenerational activity? That's very healthy for children with the wider family. I'm not religious in the sense of expecting God to do anything, some deity, but I go to synagogue on a regular basis. My son, my 4-year-old son in Finland, we have a synagogue here in Turku. He loves to go because he gets to play with these other kids. Okay. And then afterwards, there's a spread with the Jewish bread, challah. It's the twisted bread with honey. My son can eat an entire challah. Okay. He can eat an entire bread. He's got the metabolism of a furnace, so it just disappears. And he has some friends there to play with and run around. And there's somebody who always brings a bottle of vodka, and it's intergenerational, and you have a good conversation about what's ever happening in the community. But those are things, just those informal activities, dinner with the family, some kind of intergenerational activity, some sports, just so it's a well-rounded life. But yeah, we realize fully that it's very difficult for the parent who's trying to do the best for their child to keep them out of tutoring when all the other kids are getting tutoring. It's a very tough situation.
I do have some advice for them when they ask me, because I think it's similar to what you said, because it's, I think it starts with, one is, of course, starting with being clear yourself. And second is finding other families, even just one, right? Even if you just find one other family who think alike. And you realize actually it's not like they don't exist. They do. And a lot of people probably go, but they don't like it. So have a discussion, right? Talk about it. So basically let people know what you think. And once you put your voice there, you might get some unexpected responses or partners. And then if you, as you said, like if there are 3-4 families of you guys, and then you will not feel alone. And you can have outings together, have this community. So that's why I've been encouraging my readers to do, like, find other family, because that's what I'm actually doing that as well. I'm actually organizing my readers in Japan, who are actually mostly Chinese families, to meet together, to talk about those things, to find out, oh, actually it's not only me, everybody is, is anxious about it and then do not agree with this. Well, maybe you guys can, form your own group, right? And then like, at least you get some, so you have to kind of, if there isn't a existing community, and then start one, right? And it's actually usually not as difficult as you think. So that's one thing I'm advising or sort of giving some tips for them to do. But I know, again, I agree with you, it's difficult. But at least starting with building one community, starting even just with one other person, one other mother, or one other partner, or one other family in the neighbor would be a starting point.
It's a starting point for your own mental health and for coping, for sure, in a intensely competitive world that is itself so unhealthy. But the government, this is, the bottom-up approach is what you can do as an individual. The top-down approach is what policymakers should be doing. Policymakers should prohibit advertisements for tutoring. Okay, if you can't outlaw tutoring, you can't outlaw cigarettes. At least you ban the advertisements for cigarettes. You ban the tutoring. and ban the advertisements for tutoring, rather.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think that's why, because you cannot just throw your hands. I think that's what I see a bit. Okay, so I can't do. Those companies are too powerful. Those families are too excited. I said, no, this is because they were giving the perception that there's no other option, right? And then that's part of exactly that's what the government should be doing. Otherwise, you're not doing your job.
And the government should also do a better job to make these exams prep proof. And you can make these prep proof by scrambling the subjects. And so that it's much harder for these tutoring companies to justify charging so much money, because they won't be able to really prep these kids for these exams. And you can make them prep proof by scrambling the subjects. You can make them prep proof by altering the assessment. There are a number of ways of making tests more prep proof than they are, but this is a top-down problem. It's a bottom-up problem.
True, I agree. And I think for the test proof, there's some, at least there is some silver lining. I think that in Japan there are efforts, at least some percentage of the schools are trying to put 10 to 20% of their admission not dependent on the current test. So there are different ways, inquiry-based, project-based. I think there's a lot of effort. Right. Yeah, but so indeed, because I think when I admire those efforts too, because I think there are intellectuals in Japan who is keenly aware of this issue. And then the way they're trying to do is basically, build something alternative, like, oh, there's other ways. Recently, they have launched a online university called the Zen University. Before there was called the N High School, so it's all online. So that's one effort trying to kind of bridge the gap by region or also by gender, and gender is another big issue in Japan as well, in terms of access to resources. Anyway, so I think that's excellent. I think I want to go back to almost just the beginning. I think we covered a range of topics. I want to go back to the beginning when you talked about the reverse almost of the ICT education in Finland, or the reflection, because it's very interesting, because my last visit to Finland is 2018. In 2018, there's still very much trendy to go ICT. I think all the schools I visited, all the PowerPoint I listened, I remember there was a slide talking about the national curriculum where ICT is a core part of it.
Right.
It's only now a couple of years, or 4 years to be exact, but with COVID, that I think people already start to realize the downside of a ICT education, which I think is very timely, because as I said, I think in Japan, because I just visited their education administration, and then talk about looking at their PowerPoint. Also, there's a big push for ICT as well. So I'm curious in terms of your warning, if we don't do ICT, then what are the things that kids should do? We talk about reading, of course, but I think now so many schools are using ICT as almost like as a handicap, like, because lots of your content can be on the iPad. It feels to be easier, easier for teachers. It's more engaging for kids. So I almost see the trend is becoming wider and wider.
You use it as a crutch? Do you mean?
Yeah, as a crutch, exactly. Yeah. Like want to use it. Yeah, it's like teacher feel like this is one way. I see in Japan, I see that this is as one way to support teachers. So teachers have less work or easier to grade and all that. So I can see a lot of justification why this is good. And that's why system want to have it more. But that's why I think when it comes out, when Finland is already trying to make a U-turn, can you tell us more, like, then where is U-turning to?
Well, there are people here pushing for a U-turn. Okay. There are people here who say that EdTech has gone too far. I feel that way. I'm not a Finnish citizen. I'm just a visiting professor here for the year. But I remember I've been going to one school in Eastern Helsinki since 2009. I've returned several times. It's in a neighborhood called Kallahti, Kallahti. And I remember in 2017, when I visited, and the principal, Timo Heikkinen, showed me the new IT curriculum and explained that all the kids would get iPads or Chromebooks or notebooks. I can't remember exactly which. And I told him, I said, Timo, this is a mistake. The kids are going to stop reading because they're going to be glued to their Chromebook or notebook or iPad, and they won't stick to the assignment. They're going to find ways to look at Facebook and TikTok, whatever, Twitter. I don't know if TikTok existed back then. But they're not going to focus on what they should be doing because it's just too easy to be distracted. And Timo said, no, they'll follow their passion. This will give them an opportunity to really personalize their learning. Well, I visited again several months ago. And the first thing he said to me was, Sam, you were right. The kids aren't reading anymore, and the boys in particular. I'm not the only person.
What grade is the school, if I may ask? Is it a middle school?
I'm sorry?
Is it a middle school or is it primary school? What's the age of the kids?
It's grades 1 through 9.
Ah, okay.
1 through 9. So that's called the Peruskola, the comprehensive school here in Finland, before they decide on their track, whether it's vocational or academic. So, this is a predictable eventuality. EdTech makes it very difficult to focus. And I think we have to follow the money. There's a tremendous amount of money behind EdTech, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Apple. And, they do have these weekend retreats for teachers and administrators with steak and lobster and golf and tennis. And they send you back with goodies, including, whether it's a Chromebook or a notepad or an iPad, and you become a brand ambassador, and they sink their hooks deeper and deeper. I just don't see it as that effective. There are good things, no doubt, about EdTech, but it's been way overused. A very good historian at Stanford University is now retired, Larry Cuban, wrote an important book 20 years ago called Oversold and Underused. Okay. This was about EdTech. So he saw this more than 20 years ago. He had been a teacher himself, then a principal, then a superintendent, then he became a professor. He knew the classroom from the inside. And I also know the classroom from the inside. I'm an accident as an academic. I was a history teacher for 18 years before I became an academic. And I remember back in the 1990s, lots of people pushing EdTech. And I didn't buy it then. I don't buy it now. What I focused on as a history teacher was close analysis of primary documents. And I had my students focus on the original texts. So if you're doing early American education, early American economic policy, we would read Alexander Hamilton and his report on the National Bank, his report on manufacturing. I think it was, the title was Report on Manufacturers. Read those closely. And you don't need any computer, you just have the text. And then summarize the argument, evaluate the argument, put it in contemporary context, and debate it. And that's how you learn how to break down a document. That is a invaluable skill, to learn how to take a document, a dense 6-page report, boil it down to its 3 or 4 central salient points, evaluate those points, put them in context, debate them. You don't need anything more than books to do that, and a pen, pencil, and some paper. And you develop real critical thinking skills. And moreover, I had my students working in groups to debate this. You develop social skills. So there's a lot that can be done, so much that can be done intellectually without computers. And I have students who write to me still from way back when, who say, thank you so much for teaching me how to abstract. That was my big verb. You need to learn how to abstract, to take a 6-page historical document and boil it down to its essential points. And then write a crisp assessment. That's a really tough thing to do. But if you get good at that, you can get so good at analyzing so many different phenomena outside of history. But I maintain that that kind of learning, very separate from educational technology, is critical. And here in Finland, yes, there's some pushback. And there is that parents initiative, citizens initiative against smartphones in the schools. I was recently in a school in a town called Raisio, just 15 kilometers north of Turku, to guest teach some classes in the lower secondary level, at the lower secondary level rather. And the teacher was sure to have his students put their phones away during class. But during the break, and it's a 15-minute break, the students in the hallways or outside were all glued to their phones. They weren't interacting with each other. They were just looking at their phones. Again, government regulation, ban the phones from schools. France has done that. And it should be done here in Finland, as many people understand. And then ed tech itself, it's got to be curbed, and you have to follow the money and be blunt about this. This is, a lot of people are making a lot of money because of ed tech, and that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. It reminded me when I visited New York, some of the private schools are very proudly displaying signs of Apple certified, or like, because the number of devices they have bought. I wasn't aware of those golf parties or steak lobster dinners, but now it all makes sense. For sure, it's a system. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your episode as a history teacher, and they're very lucky to have you. And then when you were speaking, I was thinking, well, you know, maybe it's even very rare to have teachers like you anymore. You know, that's the thing, because you need a teacher like yourself, you know, who have that experience and know how to teach the kids. And lots of the young teachers come in, or I guess maybe it was the case before as well. Like, not a lot of good people want to be teachers. So teacher as a profession is something at risk as well. Yeah, I think that was, I saw, of course, in your book, there's very, very interesting data. I remember I have marked it around teacher income, where Finland and Denmark were the only two countries, I think it's this one, were the only two countries that has comparable income with other profession who has got a tertiary education, meaning university education. But if you look at US, is about 0.7, 0.6%, 60%, right? And then even Sweden, Norway, that's lower as well. Yep. Yeah, of course, the financial is one, but also willingness. I think you also have a data around acceptance rate of college, of teachers college. It's on this page, and admission rate of teachers. Yeah, and then the teacher college, it's some of them is as low, like Oulu is as low as 4%. And even the higher ones are, you know, on a pretty healthy range. But it's interesting how, I mean, even in Japan got some interesting data. They were saying in the past, being a public school teacher is also a highly respected profession, because the name of teacher is sensei. Sensei is like master. Like, people kind of have a certain respect, especially if you're a village teacher. Like, all the, you know, like send you food. You know, like it's sort of the master of the community. So it used to be 6-to-1 ratio of application. You know, there one teacher opening, there are 6 applicants. But the NGO I was working with said right now, even in Japan, it's 1-to-1. It's dropped significantly, and then even the 1-to-1 means there's often shortage of teachers, because, you know, certain teachers will get sick or get pregnant, and all the things will happen. So that's also, like, even in the East, where there has been you could argue thousands of years of a tradition of respecting teaching as a profession. You see a challenge as well.
And that's happening in Finland, okay, in math and science. they're having trouble attracting people at the higher levels, at the lower secondary and upper secondary levels for the subjects of math and science in particular. There is a declining applicant pool, and it's a cause for great concern. I mentioned, Christopher Lash's book a while ago, The Culture of Narcissism. I think this is very much a product of the narcissism that accompanies modernity, the focus on the self. Teaching is a nation-building activity. It's a patriotic activity. It's selfless. It's anonymous. As I said last time, it's hard work. It's not about the Rolex watch. It's not about the BMW. You're not going to get a Rolex watch as a teacher. You're not going to be able to afford a Rolex watch. You're not going to be able to afford a vacation on a yacht in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean. That's going to be out of your reach. But if you want to go to business school or engineering, use your engineering degree in such a way, yes, you can have that BMW or the Rolex watch or that trip on a yacht for a week around the Aegean. That's not the province of a teacher. And as we become more self-absorbed and less communally conscious, teaching necessarily gets obscured.
Indeed, I think that goes to the very, very original point we talked about is the sense of connection or a bigger self. Teaching as a profession, as you say, I think the profession itself is a selfless profession. But when we are narrowly defining it as a job or as a way of making a living, it kind of lost its broader connection to the society. But of course, I also want to curb against or caution against what is the word? To basically making the profession noble, because you almost gave people a moral pressure to be a good teacher. So it's basically seeing the broader connection, but also guaranteed or supported by a infrastructure or by a top-down design of the system, right? For the profession to flourish. Because otherwise people would say the same, because there are lots of sayings, as you said, in Chinese as well. And then teacher is like a candle, like you burn yourself and light the world. But it feels very painful as well. It's like, why do I burn myself? So the teacher
shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to.
Exactly.
But I think, and that's what's very, I think, telling about that chart that you just shared, that histogram about relative teacher pay. That an upper secondary teacher in Finland makes about what her college classmate made. In the United States, you're making 65%, and it's worse than that, because in the United States, you don't have subsidized daycare, right? Even with health insurance, you have costs, and moreover, you're not going to have maternity paternity leave that goes for about a year at nearly full pay. So it's worse than 60%. And on top of that, you graduate from college typically with some debt, if not a lot of it. So that 65% is probably 45%, depending on whether you have children. If you have children, you really can't afford to be a teacher. And I saw male teachers in science and math in particular leave the profession over and over once they had children because they couldn't afford to stay. That's terrible commentary on American values and American culture. But this is what happens when we don't value education, and when we let the market decide income and values to the extent that we have in America and many other countries. Even Finland today, we've got a problem here with science and math teachers, attracting them and keeping them.
Well, on that note, I think I just want to make sure everybody know about this book again. So it's the English name is Education and the Commercial Mindset, and Chinese name is 教育市场化的边界. So again, there's a Chinese version is available, and then there's very, very thorough data. And then it's, I think only almost 1/4 of the book is your reference. As you imagine how much work went into getting, every paragraph, every statement is supported by data and research, which is very extensive work by Sam. So really a gift to all of us who have a chance to read it. So I really recommend having, reading the Chinese version of this book. And also I think maybe it sounds sad in a way when we talk about all those issues, but I think that's exactly why Sam wrote this book, right? So it's actually having all this data in front of us and having all these issues and the framework in front of us actually is the first step in trying to solve the problem, because we have to understand what the situation is, right? So like, kind of, I think this book really laid bare, in all the glaring facts of what commercialization has led to. And there are success stories like Finland, but even as Sam said, even Finland is not a perfect story. Like, it's nothing perfect. It's always something in the making. There's always reflections, but that's, I think, in essence how we build something great and how we improve. But there are also a lot of interesting facts. Like, I think Chris Whittle is probably not new to lots of Chinese audience, because their school has a presence in China as well. So it's very fascinating to read the first 7 chapters where this book is, where this story is threaded around all the data and the statements. And it's so interesting because when they open their school in Shenzhen, that's why it's refreshing reading your book, because I've seen their marketing material in Chinese. It's a 200-page booklet with, I don't know, maybe 100 pages of pictures of successful people. Like, there are people who are Americans and people who are Chinese. Like, basically by stacking those people together, sending this glaring message: if your kids come to the school and paying this fee, you're going to be like them. And then that was it. I was like, and I remember they were actually trying to recruit our teachers from our school. So I know, and they saw their marketing material, but this is a glaring example of how far it can go and how successful it can be. I mean, financially, because I know this story because that's when we really struggled, because we opened our school in Guangzhou. So their school is in Shenzhen, which is, the city not far away from each other in Guangdong province. And we're struggling to find, a venue for our school, or, to trying to make sure we have enough budget for teacher training and all that. On the other hand, you get this money with, significant big name investors behind it. I think they were claiming they already raised, $700 million for their school in China. I just remember, like, my jaw dropped when I saw the number. I was like, what kind of business is this? So thank you for threading that so clearly. And if I knew you a bit before, I could have talked to you. I was like, who is this person? What is this school? And all the logic is very, laid bare here. So that's why it's really a gift, I think, for whoever interested in education in general, or education in like little episodes of very interesting stories.
Thank you. And as we discussed before we started the interview, I am going to be in China, right, at your school. Yeah.
Okay, again, thank you so much, Sam, for your time, and we look forward to having you in Beijing.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to visiting.
Perfect. Great, thank you.